welcome again on this fascinating journey of research. This is the 6th video of the chapter 2, and in this video and the next video we will discuss about non-probability sampling. So what is non-probability sampling? The main difference between the two sampling categories, that is non-probability and probability sampling, is that of random selection. So actually probability sampling involves random selection, whereas non-probability does not. Random selection has to do with eliminating any kind of biasness or addressing issues emanating from having some kind of biasness or preference of the researcher. So because in one way you keep everything tied to chance, that there are fair chances for different elements to be included, and whereas non-probability sampling does not allow you to do that way, because definitely there would be some preference which will come in the way. So that is the basic difference between non-probability and and probability sampling. And I must say this also has to do something with external validity. So we have already discussed external validity in the very first video of this chapter. So external validity has to do with generalizing back to population. So for the simple reasons that probability sampling involves random selection, it has a greater generalizability to the population at large, whereas non-probability sampling, it has a limitation when it comes to generalizing back to the population. It has a very weak external validity. So that's the real thing. So again, non-probability sampling could be categorized into two broad categories: accidental or purposive. So most pop sampling methods are purposive because we normally approach with a specific plan in mind, how we are going to do our sampling. So let's begin with the first one, the first category of non-probability sampling. These three things, accidental, haphazard or convenience sampling, they all mean one the same. So it is traditionally the man on the street interview, the traditional man on the street interview, whosoever is available to you, if you do your study that way. So traditional man on the street means like who is available, who is easily available to you. So when your objective is to have a quick reading of public opinion, you actually try to take responses from whosoever passes by, whosoever you are accessible to you. So there could be many examples for accidental or convenience sampling, like typical use of college students in much psychological research is a primary matter of convenience. Rather, more than anything, it is a matter of convenience. Likewise, in clinical practice too, you might use clients available to you as your sample, and there could be research context where you have to sample by asking for volunteers. So who would like to volunteer? So if you see the common thing which is common to each of these propositions or situations is that you are not sure that whether they are actually the true representative of the population. So you have no evidence that they are representative of the population you are interested to generalize. So that is the limitation of accidental, haphazard or convenience sampling. Let's move to the second broad category, which is purposive sampling. As you could relate it, the name itself says purposive. you sample with a purpose in mind. So that is to do with purposive sampling, and it involves, usually it starts with seeking one or more specified predefined group. So one of the first thing that you are likely to do is to verify that the respondent does in fact meet the criteria for being in the sample. So you have some criterias, you set in some criteria, and then you try to recruit or try to include those people who actually meet those criteria. So in what kind of situations, in which situations you will find it more useful? When you need to reach a targeted sample quickly and where sampling for proportionality is not a primary concern. Let me stress on this proportionality. So maybe a population is quite heterogeneous with all kind of majority, minority, but your idea is not to have a representative set in the same proportion. So, but rather you wish to include different majority, minority, without any giving, without actually considering the amount or the proportions in which they belong to the population. So definitely you are likely to overweight subgroups in your population. Your idea is more about inclusion and not about the proportion. So this is purposive sampling. You want to take input from all different kinds of units that are there in purposive sampling in their population, as you could relate the same thing in stratified random sampling also. If you could remember, there also we talked about proportionate stratified random sampling and disproportionate stratified random sampling. So something to do with on the similar lines. Now the first one of purposive random sampling is actually the modal instance sampling. So what is a mode? In statistics we identify mode as the most frequently occurring value. So most frequently occurring value in a distribution, let's translate into social settings. We actually arrive at a typical case. So who is a typical case? So whenever we conduct any kind of, let's say, opinion polls, for instance, for interviewing a typical voter, we are interested in who is a typical voter. So the question is, how do we know that what the typical voter or model case is likely to be? Let's say you say that a modal worker is a person, let's say, of average age, education level and income. Let's say these three criteria you come up with, and you say that by and large every other member, by and large let's say 10 people are passing by, so by and large let's say 7 or 8 would be falling in this criteria, having maybe age group of, let's say, 18 to 45, or education level, let's say graduate, or income level, let's say mid income, or so. This is something which you could assume, but still it is not clear that if you could even use the averages of these would be the fairest. So modal instance sampling, yes, you are interested in identifying the typical case, but then there could be different problems, like what is the guarantee that the variables which you are considering represents the typical case and there couldn't be something even better? Or let's say, what if the religion or ethnicity is an important determinant of voting decisions? Now yes, we can never be sure about that who represents the modal case, but that is the limitation of this method. But yes, if our idea is to do some kind of informal sampling context, it is appropriate to go ahead with modal instance sampling. So fair assumptions. A better version of modal expert sampling, modal instance sampling could be to switch to expert sampling, because expert sampling, you, instead of researcher using his own assumptions that what constitutes a typical voter, here you have the onus is on an expert who has, let's say, who has a demonstrable experience or expertise in some area. So now you could be more sure about the validity of translating back the study, translating back the inferences of a study to the population at large. So it is essentially just a specific subcase of purposive sampling where you are you are taking an expert opinion into it. Expert sampling is to provide evidence for the validity of another sampling approach. So maybe you were not very sure in the previous case of modal instance sampling, but you could be more sure about your findings in expert sampling space. But I must admit that even experts could go wrong, so that is the disadvantage. So in this video we discussed only about these things like modal instance sampling and expert sampling. There are more kinds of purposive sampling to follow, and which we will be covering in our next video. Thank you very much.